Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Friend Wrap. I'm your host, Nicholas Lorimer, today joined by Hermann Pretorius. First thing I just want to say quickly is I'm still struggling a little bit to get my webcam working, which is why I'm not visible, but I'm sure Hermann will be able to pick up the slack in the visuals department here for us. Anyway, let's get into the first news story of today. And this is based off of some polling which is yet to be released from the Social Research Foundation, but has been reported on the media. And so we've talked, or at least I believe Hermann has talked to the head of the Social Research Foundation to just find out some of the details. And that is the first poll of support for different political parties in South Africa since the Government of National Unity was formed. So some interesting things here, finding that around 60% of people believe that the Government of National Unity is in fact working well, with only about, I think, somewhere in the 20s feeling that the Government of National Unity was performing badly. The ANC and DA have seen their support go up slightly. The DA from about 21-ish or 22% to about 24% in this most recent poll, and the ANC from around 39 to about 44% in the poll. Zuma's MK party is slightly down from 14% to 12%. And the real interesting fact here is the poll's suggestion of what's happened to EFF support. So the EFF got around about 10% in the election in May. However, this poll suggests that their support is now sitting at around 6%. I don't think this is particularly a surprise if one has been following the news recently. Hermann, what do you make of this? Do you believe that indeed the EFF is seeing a collapse in its support? And if so, is that just due to all of their internal squabbling with Floyd Shivambu leaving? What do you make of this?
I do think the EFF number particularly strikes me as true. It passes the smell test in the sense that this is a party that, if we go back a year, really had a fantastic July and August last year with their celebrations of their 10-year anniversary. But then ever since they've been in decline. We can trace it back to that event where about, 440 EFF representatives that didn't get the right amount of bus attendees to that celebration in Soweto were fired by Malema. Then they had the election campaign throughout which they were relatively quiet and ran something of quite a tepid campaign. And then, of course, you had the muted election results, followed by Floyd Shivambu's departure of the party that at the start seemed to indicate that there was no, bad blood necessarily between Malema and MK. That quickly morphed into something quite vindictive and vitriolic. And we can see that this is a party that is very much based on the whims and will of one man, Julius Malema. It was his paranoia, apparently, that sunk the EFF's chance to participate in the GNU in some form. And it was also his treatment of Floyd Shivambu and his favoring of Marshall Dlamini for the deputy leadership or possibly his successor that seemed to sever Shivambu's ties with the EFF. So this is a man who sees high parliamentary turnout in his own caucus, struggles to maintain members, struggles to maintain loyalists, and it is just indicative of a party that really is about one man and not about survival. So this is, I think, to be expected. To lose 3% or 4% from, percentage points from the just under double-digit success they had at the election. I mean, it seems to bear out that the EFF doesn't really know what it can do now that it isn't anymore the main insurgent party coming from the left, that mantle having gone to MK.
Yeah, it really does seem like the EFF is sort of flailing, unable to distinguish itself as being any real different from MK. And I think, we've been saying this for a while on the show that if Malema didn't allow space for other personalities in his party, it was going to fail. And I think that seems to be what may be happening. I mean, there's still a chance of recovery here, but I think that would take MK imploding for the EFF to have any chance of a comeback. Because right now, if you have sort of radical left politics, or you kind of like Zuma and you like Shivambu and all those characters in our politics, then MK is the place to go. The EFF is sitting there without really a purpose right now, I think. As for the GNU itself, the ANC up slightly, the DA up slightly, not a huge change, not a sort of breakthrough that I think some might have thought could be possible, particularly for the DA, who are now looking to detoxify their brand for many South Africans. This part of the polling said that 2/3 of people surveyed felt that the DA was doing well, and 20% felt that they were performing poorly. That's pretty good numbers for them, but I would imagine the DA would have been hoping for higher numbers.
I think that's right. And one sort of needs to calculate into these numbers that this is pretty much still the honeymoon period for the GNU. So if the honeymoon period for the GNU can only see the party reach 24%, then there is real, or there ought to be real concern about what happens when things start to go wrong. If this is the best that the party can get from the honeymoon shine of a broadly 60% approval rating for the party, yet only a 2 or 3 percentage point increase for the party's support levels, I would, if I were Steenhuisen and the people around him like Leon Schreiber, I'd be worried looking at this polling. One needs to calculate a decline in vote share as the next elections come in. As Gareth van Onsselen's polling data analysis showed, that the DA did well when it wasn't campaign season and started doing less well as campaign season intensified. So you need to factor in for that as 2026, the local government elections loom. But you also need to factor in for the fallout that might occur should the DA decide to leave the government of national unity, or if the sentimental indicators stop showing the positives and we really get to the nitty-gritty of, job creation, fixed capital investment, load shedding stability, port stability, infrastructure development. Once those report indicators come back from the GNU that aren't purely sentiment based, there might be a slight decrease in the overall approval of the GNU and an expected decrease in the party standings, especially the ANC and the DA. So 24%, I mean, it's fine. It's what the DA essentially got in 2016. But I would sit uncomfortably were I the DA leadership, and these were the numbers I was seeing.
All right, let's quickly move on to our next story. So, of course, on the show of the past couple of days, we've extensively covered the leaving of Cilliers Brink, the ejection of Cilliers Brink from the mayoral office in Tshwane. Here's an interesting little detail, though, which is that as Cilliers Brink was leaving, there was a crowd of municipal employees who jeered him, apparently swore at him, and were very rude to him as he left, basically celebrating his departure. The city manager, Johan Metler, wrote a strong memo that was sent around internally condemning this behavior, which is, I think, a sign of his professionalism. Metler wrote, I found this behavior to be insensitive, humiliating, degrading, inflammatory, offensive, and downright despicable. One of our core values is respect, which behooves us to treat others with dignity, kindness, and empathy, having positive regard for everyone and acknowledging their humanity. The spectacle that was on full display last Thursday goes against the grain of the culture that this administration is working hard to institutionalize. I strongly condemn this behavior, which has the potential to tarnish and damage the reputation of this institution. He did, however, say that it was only a handful of employees who mistreated and abused Councillor Brink as he left. In this institution, we shall respect each and every party and their political leaders. They are here as a result of a democratic election process, and we respect democracy. As an institution, we strive for high-performance culture through effective management that holds people responsible for performance and behavior. We commit ourselves to live by these values by demonstrating it in our behaviors and ways of working. This is how culture is built. I think a pretty strong memo and exactly the kind of thing you want to see in the civil service. And so I'm very glad that Johan Metler remains the city manager of Tshwane.
Yes, and what's even there are two sort of dimensions of worry that we can add to the situation. Number one is that after 8 years of non-ANC governance, barring 8 months in 2020 when the city was under illegal administration, after almost a decade, we see that the civil service in Tshwane's metropolitan area is still quite clearly politicized. This is how deep cadre deployment runs. So, there really is a sort of a wake-up call to be had for the DA and the Freedom Front Plus and the IFP across the board, that you really need to come up with a solution to proactively tackle this political entrenchment of interests at a level that shouldn't be political at all. But the second question, or the second issue of the dimension of worry, is that the ANC's chief whip in Tshwane, Aaron Maluleka, and the EFF's caucus leader, Obakeng Ramabudo, have now actually attacked Metler for taking that line. Just an indication of how vitriolically political and totally lacking a sense of public service or decency these parties have degenerated to, especially at a local government level. This is intensely worrying, and it makes me, as a person living in Pretoria, very worried about what comes next, particularly given the position of someone like Johan Metler, a civil servant with frankly, a stupendous track record, someone who was a candidate and a desired candidate for the Joburg city manager position, and also at the same time had overtures from the Cape Town government for his expertise there. For the Tshwane government to have gotten Metler appointed here was a real coup, a real positive step. And I remember still Brink saying to me that without Metler, this city won't be able to be turned around. And one just wonders what comes next. If the ANC and EFF could be this irresponsible, this reckless, and this flagrantly politically toxic, what they might do to non-political appointees like Metler, and what they might do to people who should be non-political appointees were jeering the ousting of a mayor that they had no business in taking public sides on.
All right, let's quickly go over our last story here, and this is about land claims. So one of the categories under which people were allowed to make land claims was if they were a labor tenant during apartheid. Labor tenants were farm workers who, under apartheid, were given access to land instead of monetary payment. The system was thought to be unjust in the post-1994 world, and the Labor Tenants Act granted title deeds for people who were previously labor tenants. The deadline to submit claims on this basis was in 2001. So, 23 years ago, we'd expect this problem to have been mostly resolved by now. However, of the 20,500 claims, most of which were in Mpumalanga and KZN, the Department of Land Reform's database so far has only finalized 55% of these cases and is aiming to maybe, within the next 30 years, if they hit target, finish processing these claims.
I mean, it just illustrates the embarrassing extent to which the rhetoric of land aggression and the reality in terms of the exercise of governmental power on land, redistribution or land justice, whatever you want to call it, how there's a vast chasm between these two things, and it sort of exposes the EFF and the ANC as opportunists who drive wedges rather than solutions. IRR polling for the last decade has shown that land is a minor concern for South Africans across the board. And at a time when economic growth is within reach, when positive sentiment is so tangible for this country, one would hope that it would be an acknowledgement that the obsession with the destruction of property rights has been in bad faith over the last decade. And one just thinks of the likes of David Rachase, someone who also sought to get due justice in terms of property rights and land ownership following the fall of apartheid. That was frankly terrible for land ownership and property rights, and yet the government fought him every step of the way. So it is a warning that we should take seriously the difference between radical rhetoric and constructive politics, and it should give us the ammunition to call out time and time again those people who want to divide by playing up emotive non-issues, that this is a country that wants to work together, and that those who want to sow division are frankly just on the wrong side of where the moderate mindset of most South Africans are.
Definitely well said. Okay, that's all the time we have for today. We hope you found the show interesting. That's a wrap.